Hi, if you're in the market for a wine cooler or wine cabinet, as some companies call it, and you're not really sure what to go for, then it can be really confusing because there's a lot to choose from on the market. So what I've done is I've come up with 10 things to consider before buying a wine cooler. I would appreciate it if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, just give us a quick thumbs up. I would just point out that on this model, it hasn't got the handle on at the moment. This is actually going out in probably around an hour's time. That's why I'm recording it first thing in the morning. So this one would normally have a handle on it, so it looks a lot smarter, but I've just unboxed it for now, just to make this video. The first one I consider to be one of the more important things to consider, so it really has to be very high on the list, and that's whether you want it freestanding or integrated. Now that really depends, I suppose, on the look that you want from the wine cooler. Majority of people tend to go for the freestanding ones now. Also on the freestanding ones, on the whole, you can get more bottles of wine in there for the same external space. But for me, it very much depends on the look that you're after. If you want a seamless design within your kitchen and everything to match, then perhaps integrated is the way to go, and that should be the priority over the capacity within the wine cooler. Number 2 on the list, and again this is a really important one to think about, it's the size of the wine cooler. So clearly if you design in a kitchen, then you need to allow space for it to fit in. Quite a few people, if this is your first wine cooler, then they're tending to go for models like this. This is a really popular one that we do. This is a 30cm model. There are some 60cm models available, and of course heights will vary as well. So if you're just after something where you want to store a handful of bottles of wine, then normally something like this is really popular. But if you really are a wine connoisseur, then there are much larger versions available. So I suppose you really need to decide on how many bottles of wine you want to keep in there. Some of them range from the really tiny ones, around 6 to 10 bottles, and you can go into the realms of hundreds of bottles of wine, but that will really depend on the size of the wine cooler. Number 3, and I suppose this can be linked with number 2 slightly, but I will put it as a separate one, and that's think about the future. And what I mean by that, if you're not too sure about how much you're going to use it, especially if you're new to the wine cooler concept, then I suppose what you need to do, personally, what I always try and say to customers, is think a bit more about the future. What you don't want to do is you don't want to go and buy something like this, where you can store a handful of bottles of wine in it, and then in the future, you'll go and buy a lot more wine and then want to store it. It's not just a case of purchasing the wine and putting it in straight away. Some people like to keep bottles of wine in here for months or even years. So I'd recommend just think about the future, and if you've got the ability to, then go for something slightly bigger than you need at the moment, because if you do very much get into wine, or if you're going to purchase wine to keep it for some time, then that could really pay off for you. Number 4 on the list, do you want a single zone or dual zone temperature option? And what I mean by that, think about the types of wine that you're going to keep in here. If you're very much just into, say, white wine, then a single zone model may be okay for you. I suppose like the majority of people, you might go between white, perhaps rosé, and red as well. If you're into different types of wine, then really a dual zone one is ideal for you. Now, I suppose some people think, if you're very much into red wine, why would you need a wine cooler? But what it would do, if you think about the room that your red wine is going to be kept in, then for a lot of people, if you're going to keep it, say, in your kitchen, then the temperature in your kitchen will fluctuate a lot during the winter and also during the summer. So if you can keep it within a wine cooler, then you can select a certain temperature and it will be maintained all the time, which is ideal for any kind of wine. But I think a lot of people now, if you're quite new into the concept of a wine cooler, then something like this will be okay. This is just a single zone model. But if you're very much into your wine, and if you're into the different types of wine, then personally I'd consider a dual zone model. Number 5, does the model have UV resistant glass doors? Now, if you're going to have glass on the front, you want to make sure that it's not affected by the UV rays coming in, and that in theory can damage the wine as well. So just make sure that, well, it's something to consider about buying a wine cooler, that make sure that it's got UV resistant glass. Number 6, have a look at the controls that the wine cooler offers. And what I mean by that, first of all, have a look to see if it's got a display inside. Hopefully it should have, because the majority of models should display the temperature on the inside. Also, how easy is it to change? How easy is it to adjust the temperature? On this model it's really easy. All you need to do is just press plus and minus. Because it's just a single zone model, then that's nice and easy. Also, does the model have humidity controls? Now, wine doesn't like low levels of humidity. If it's too low, then it can, in theory, start to dry out the cork, and that really is something you don't want to happen. So just have a look to see if the model has got a humidity control as well. You will mainly tend to find it on some of the higher end models, but it's certainly worth considering. Number 7, can you reverse the door? I know for some people it's quite an obvious thing, but on some models you can't reverse the door, and that can be quite frustrating, especially if it's, say, in a corner where you've got it in your kitchen. But that's something to consider. Have a look whereabouts it's going to go, have a look which way you want the door to open, and on the model you're looking at buying, just check that you can reverse the door if you need to. Number 8, does the model have an anti-vibration design? And what I mean by that, some bottles of wine will have a small amount of sediment in them, and if you're going to store it for long periods, then ideally you want a model that has an anti-vibration design to reduce the amount that the wine will move around. Now, I won't spend too long explaining that, but personally I'd recommend if you're going to store wine for a long time, then have a look for something that has got something like an anti-vibration design to reduce the amount of sediment that is moved around while it's sat in the wine cooler. Number 9, and I know this sounds quite basic, but for some people this could be a really important one to think about, and that's, can you adjust the shelves? Can you take the shelves out, and can you adjust where they're positioned? A lot of them are fairly fixed where they are. Clearly you can take the shelves out, but that's not really going to help with the capacity or the number of bottles that you get in there. Sometimes the sizes of wine are different. On the whole, these are normally measured using the 75 centilitre bottles. That tends to be a standard size that most manufacturers will be geared towards. But just have a look, because if you want different sizes of wine, or even things like champagne, where some of the bottles are slightly bigger, then that could be a really important factor for you. Number 10, and the final thing to consider, is the energy efficiency of the model. Now, this is something that I think a lot of people tend to overlook, especially when you're looking at something like a wine cooler, but personally energy efficiency should be a really important factor. Clearly it's going to be plugged in all the time. It's not something like a washing machine or a tumble dryer where you're just using it on the odd occasion. With something like a wine cooler, it's going to be plugged in 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So trying to find a model that is very energy efficient should be key, because what you'll find over the years of ownership, that can make a huge difference to the amount of electricity that it uses, and in a nutshell that's how much it will cost to run. I hope you found it useful, 10 things to consider before buying a wine cooler. Now, I know there are a lot more than 10 things to consider. I've actually got several more things that are not quite as important as the first 10 that I've covered. You've got things like the price of it, things like the colour. There's a lot of other small things to consider, but really I consider those 10 things the major things that I would personally recommend, and I suppose a lot of customers are asking us when they come into our showroom. So if there's something else that you think I've missed that I should have put into the list, then pop in the comments. Also, if you have got any questions on things like wine coolers, then we do have normally a model on display, or we can get them fairly quickly. So if you've got any questions, then just pop it in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.